Hello, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to Inner Space Assembly. Today's theme is the depth of self-awareness. Very interesting topic. And for that, we have our speaker Matthew Earl with us. And Matthew is a science graduate and former spiritual sceptic. 20 years ago, he has an interest in self-development led him to explore Raj Yoga meditation, and also Matthew is based in London and work as the head of business growth for an IT consultancy. So welcome, Matthew.
Thank you for that introduction. Is this okay? Yeah. Welcome, everyone, and everybody joining online. Warm welcome too. Thank you for the introduction. And yes, it is an interesting topic, the depth of self-awareness. So what does it mean to be self-aware? We could have different ideas of who we are throughout our lifetime. Daddy Janki, one of our great teachers, a great yogi, very wise, once said, the awareness of being a child of God is a very elevated awareness to have. So that's maybe one thing to consider, just go straight to the top. And I say that as someone who was a devout atheist about 25 years ago. So this idea of awareness is not really to do with how intelligent I am. I can be very, very intelligent, have an immense amount of information and skill based on worldly knowledge. But it doesn't mean that I'm guaranteed to be contented. And it doesn't necessarily mean that I'm guaranteed to be able to make other people contented, to find peace and contentment in life. And I think for most of us, our awareness is based on our life experiences and experiences right from being a child to the present day, and all the influences that we've had from maybe even before birth to where we are now. Parental influences, cultural influences, societal, religious or non-religious influences, influences of teachers, influences of the media, especially these days. But certainly we've been exposed to a huge amount of information. And when we're very, very young, we're certainly before the age of 7, we're really like a sponge. And so the influences and information we take in up to that point, very much the mind accepts as fact. And then for many of us, we spend the rest of our lives trying to figure out everything based on that foundation. And that foundation isn't always a strong one. In fact, our awareness, if it's based on our life experience and the memories we have, the experiences we have, the choices we make, well, research has shown that around 85% of the information we take in is negative. So negative impressions of the self, negative impressions of others, and it leads to obviously a negative impression of the world. And if that is the foundation of my awareness, then no matter how well educated I am, I'm always going to be working on a broken premise, one that has very, very weak foundations. So there may be success and progress in terms of career or in terms of various roles that I play. But eventually I'm likely to find myself in a place where there is some feeling of lack or some hole in terms of my sense of contentment, my sense of peace of mind. And despite all the psychological evidence for this, I think if you look at the world at the moment and everything that's going on, I have to ask myself, in terms of the awareness of humanity as a whole, of which I am part, is it successful? I can argue that, well, there's been lots of progress in science, there's been lots of progress in this and that. But there's been religions for millennia, there's been meditation for millennia, there's been science for a very long time. And yeah, we can argue that technology makes things easier, and makes things quicker and makes things more convenient. And in terms of healthcare, you could certainly argue that it produces life-saving technology. But then I have to ask myself about the quality of life, not just the longevity, but the quality for myself, and also when I look around at my fellow human beings. So it's easy to get, when I think about these things, easy to get very despondent. And I certainly wouldn't be sharing these things if I didn't know there was a solution on the other side of it. And in Raj Yoga, many people have tried meditation, and there are so many different types of meditation available these days. And just like there's so many choices and opinions about everything, and I have to find something that works for me. And sometimes it's a matter of experimenting with a few different things. But when I look at the difference with Raj Yoga, my experience was that it's profoundly different. And the reason I say that is because of how quickly I started to experience a real change in terms of feeling more peaceful in my own life when I started practicing it. But also that it gives a very clear definition of identity, of who we are, the truth of who we are as a soul consciousness, as it's called in Raj Yoga meditation. And from my experience of trying different types of meditation, all the other ones, they do not have a clear definition of what the soul is. And everything else, whether it's science or meditation or religion, is based on a concept that's derived from stories that have been told in the human experience. As soul consciousness, when I really start to learn who I am as a soul and develop that awareness of being a soul, actually allows me to have a point of reference where I can become free of the influences of the mind. And it reminds me of the story of Raj Yoga, the meaning of Raja Yoga, Raja meaning royal, and yoga, the original meaning union or connection. And those two words together, alluding to the connection I have with myself and how dignified, how royal is the experience of that connection. And in Raj Yoga, we always look to the inside first, that everything that I experience and create in my life, and that's true of humanity as a whole, starts off from my inner awareness, my inner being. Everything we've created in humanity has started off as a thought in somebody's imagination. For instance, the chair you sat on, at some point in history, somebody thought, I'm fed up of sitting on the floor, and imagined something that could raise you off the ground. And it started off as a thought, and then it maybe became a drawing, and then it got made into something physical. So the awareness that I have of who I am is very much going to dictate the quality of what I create in my thoughts, in my words, in my deeds. And this idea of looking at the awareness of the self as an inner kingdom, Raja Yoga, and reconnecting with the true version of who I am. What does it really mean? Well, in Raja Yoga, the soul is seen as the king or queen, the emperor or empress. The soul is the real identity of each human being, the real consciousness, the foundation of consciousness, the real I am. And the rest of the kingdom, the right hand you could see as the chief advisor to the king or queen, which would be the mind. And then beyond that, you have the senses of the body: sight, sound, touch, taste, and smell. And what's happened over time is that I lose the awareness of being a soul, and I actually get pulled more and more into my awareness, the awareness of myself as from the information I receive through the senses, what I hear through my ears, what I see through my eyes. And the kingdom becomes reversed. It becomes like an anarchy, where the senses are really controlling the mind, and the mind is controlling the soul. And when you have a king or queen that's dethroned and he's being run by the subjects, then you've got a problem in that kingdom. So in Raj Yoga, the principle is that actually when I empower myself as a soul, when I reconnect to the awareness of being the ruler, and that the mind should follow the directions of the soul, and then the senses of the body will behave accordingly. So rather than being pulled by information, desires, that I'm actually connected with the original qualities of the self, and that becomes my foundational awareness. And what are those original qualities of the self? In Raj Yoga, we learned that the original true qualities of the soul are based on the foundation of purity, meaning that the sense of cleanliness in the consciousness, that there's no contamination from any negative influence, from any false influence. Make sense? And then when there is that sense of cleanliness, then there is the foundation in which peace can be experienced. Because when there is contamination in the intellect, in the mind, and that's affecting the soul, because the soul is not empowered anymore, then there's always going to be a disturbance. A lack of cleanliness leads to disturbance in the consciousness. The mind and the soul start to be in conflict. There is conflict in the kingdom. And that is actually the birth of stress. We often talk about stress having external origins, but actually the external things that appear to trigger stress are just that, they're triggers. Because if I really was peaceful inside, then nothing would be able to trigger me. And it sounds like a very high goal, and it is. But it's an awareness to start to develop that I actually have this power available to me. So part of shifting my awareness is realizing how powerful the soul can be and what the true qualities of the soul are. And also to understand what has gone wrong in terms of external influences through the senses and the mind being derailed has led to the awareness of the soul becoming diminished. And I need to regain that awareness. So if I have that purity, that cleanliness in the mind, then the foundation for peace. And we talk a lot about peace. Quite often these days it's talked about as being the opposite of war. But actually peace is really I need to explore what that means to me. And if I try and relate to peace from the context of my experiences in life, there may have been a few occasions where I've experienced peace, but the quality of that peace is always going to be tainted by the negativity that's also present in the mind. So unless I start to develop the awareness that I need to take time out every day to step back away from the mind and everything that has influenced it, and be able to reconnect to the soul and reconnect to the pure origins of the experience of peace. It's a very, very different experience of peace. The experience I have of peace is that it's a very vibrant energy. It brings a lot of calm. It brings, or is based on, the foundation of silence. It's a very deep, creative power. The peace isn't just the absence of conflict. It is in itself an extremely powerful virtue that doesn't need any opposite to exist. It's an original quality. So if I try and experience peace from meditation that is just focused on the mind, then it's very, very difficult. But if I can learn to actually step away from the mind, and to be able to do that, I need to have an understanding of the self that is something other than the mind. It's a bit like trying to solve a problem from being within the problem itself. It's very difficult. And the mind is like a huge tangled web of chaos. It's just got so many influences there. Sometimes we compare it to a cinema screen where instead of the screen of the mind, instead of one film playing, it's like you're watching 100 or 1,000 films playing at the same time. And then you're trying to make sense of life based on that. Can you imagine sitting in a cinema and watching a screen where 100 films are playing at the same time? But actually that is the reality of dealing with our own minds. And we're so used to that chronic sorrow that we can't see the wood for the trees. And I may think that I'm making intelligent decisions, but it's a bit like trying to set off from an airport or a train station. You don't know the original train station you're at, and you don't know where your destination is. And you're just working from within a cobweb of confusion. And so it's nothing to do with intelligence. It's just to do with the influences in the mind. In fact, more intelligence can actually work against you, because then I tend to analyze and think about things even more and can tie myself in even bigger knots. So the soul is beyond all of this, deep down. The soul at its core is completely clean and pure. So I need that point of reference. I need to understand, I need to have that awareness, that deep awareness of who I am as a soul, beyond the influence of the mind. And this is, in Raj Yoga, we call this soul consciousness. And this, for me, is the big difference with Raj Yoga meditation, is that it precisely defines who I am as a soul. You know, we define the soul as a point of consciousness that sits behind the eyes, sometimes called the position of the third eye. And the soul itself sits pretty much in the middle of the brain, where it controls the body. Makes sense to sit there, because that's where the control system is for this. And we define the soul as a tiny point of light, like a tiny, tiny star in the distance. And this point of light is a non-physical energy. And then we talk about the qualities of the soul: purity, peace. We'll come to the other ones. And when I first heard this 20 years ago, I was quite skeptical. And the mind was sort of saying, well, that's interesting, but so what? But then when I actually started to realize that in meditation, it gave me a focus that was different from the mind. It's a bit like if you are trying to get to know someone, it's really useful to know what they look like and where they are. It's very difficult to find someone without that information. And yet, without knowing what the soul is and having it precisely defined in quite a scientific way, funnily enough, that I don't have anywhere to focus my mind that is separate. So there's nowhere I don't know. People talk about the soul, but if you ask anybody to define the soul, I've never heard a proper, clear explanation of what the soul is outside of Raj Yoga. And also having seen the difference, having tried various different types of meditation and then tried Raj Yoga, the difference of the study in Raj Yoga, because we say it's a study and a practice, being able to study and learn about who I am, to develop that awareness of who I really am as a soul. That's the real crowning glory of Raj Yoga meditation. And it's a totally different awareness of self than anything you can learn in the outside world. And I'm very passionate about this because it is now more than ever so much needed that we are at least curious enough to explore and deeply explore what the soul is. Because surely we've come to a time where we're starting to realize that everything else is failing. I mean, you don't need to be a brain surgeon or a political or environmental or spiritual or scientific expert to see that. It would be naive not to recognize what's happening. And there are some very, very clever people out there, IQ-wise. There are some geniuses, there's a lot of very talented people. But where is the direction of everything going? Is it going towards something that is supporting, enabling, and sustaining peace for the individual and the collective society and the world population? Or is it going in the other direction? So it really is time for another paradigm. And in Raj Yoga, we learn that this actually is part of the story of humanity, that we go through this cycle of experience, and that actually what happens in life is that the further we move away from truth, the more that the drama of life tries to wake us up, and the more difficult things get until we start to awaken. It's a bit like walking away from the light. You can only walk so far until you're in complete darkness and you think, oh, this can't be right. And we've really got to that stage. But we also have the answer, because this is a time where the divine energy is very present and there is an opportunity to change my awareness. And I'm not going to be able to think or analyze or debate my way out of it. I have to really take time out to develop a practice of silence. And it's that practice of stepping back and creating space for silence, space for quietness, where I'm stepping back from the external influences for a while each day and reconnecting with the self, the soul. So this is the basic aspect that I wanted to talk about. And I think also it's worth talking about some of the challenges of moving away from the consciousness of the world, because in meditation, when we talk about meditation in Raj Yoga, it's also worth defining what that actually means, because we use the words yoga and meditation interchangeably. Yoga in a way is a better word, but maybe an even better word than yoga is remembrance. Because what I'm trying to do when I'm meditating is actually I'm just taking time out to get to know myself as a soul and remember who I really am. It's remembering I've forgotten myself. And this forgetting is so embedded that I really do believe that my experience of my life is who I am, and yet it's such a subjective experience. It's really a collection of stories that I've been told and stories that I tell myself. And when I start to try and remember who I am and connect with that, it's also a big challenge, because I'm trying to pull my mind away from habits and a state of being that it's become really, really embedded in. So I actually need a lot of discipline to be able to develop a practice of meditation. It's not an easy path because most of the people around me will create an energy that's in the old track. And that also influences me as well to stay or go back to that old track. So I can sit in meditation in a meditation center or a course and feel, oh yeah, this is good. And then when I go out and get on the bus or the tube or whatever, and when I'm surrounded by that energy again, it can very quickly go out the window. And it's this habitual state of the mind that I've developed so many strong habits and tracks that are based on I am as a physical being rather than a spiritual being. These habits and ways of being aware of myself that are very much linked to outside influences. One of the first challenges that I find when I try and establish a regular awareness of the soul in meditation is that I become aware of just how messed up the mind is. And a lot of people quit their meditation practice because they sit down and they think, okay, I'm going to focus on being a soul. And the mind goes, nah, you're not really a soul. And, well, you're not very peaceful, are you? Because, I mean, think about that argument you had today. And then the mind will come up with all sorts of things. And this is why people, on the whole, don't like to sit down and be still. I don't like the idea of being quiet and find meditation very, very difficult. And I think one thing to understand is that that's completely normal. You know, when I sit down and have meditations, some of them are really awful. It's like, okay, I decide I'm going to sit down for 20 minutes and the mind just will not stay still. It'll just get locked onto something that's happened or something that I'm concerned about in the future that might happen. And then I try and say to the mind, okay, let's just focus on the soul and connecting to peace. And there's just too much of a pull. The mind will just keep going back. And then it'll go off on other tangents like, oh, what we're going to have for dinner tonight. All sorts of little things. It's a bit like this movie, this screen I was telling you about, with hundreds of movies playing. The mind is become disempowered because there's so many different opinions and so many stories in my awareness that the mind is just all over the place. And this is why a lot of people now are really struggling to sleep. They're really struggling to have much enthusiasm about anything. They're really struggling to concentrate for long periods on anything. It's because the mind is just completely blown out and is totally removed from any semblance of the truth about who I am. So this can sound a bit negative, but the thing is that when we're teaching meditation, when we're learning meditation, it's good to know what's actually going to happen. Because what I do know is that, and I've been through some periods where I've had a few months of meditation being very difficult, that if I just keep doing it every day and keep learning and developing the depth of awareness of who I am as a soul, it's actually part of making progress. Because if this stuff wasn't there in the mind, we wouldn't need meditation. The whole thing about developing a soul conscious awareness is dealing with the realization that there's something badly wrong with my current awareness. Otherwise, there wouldn't be anything that I need to heal. And the healing process is a very beautiful one, but it also a little bit messy. Does this resonate with anyone? So one of the things is about developing a daily routine of meditation. I often remember whenever I'm talking about it, I'm always remembering when I started Raj Yoga meditation 21 years ago. And I very much remember the process, the first few weeks being quite inspired by the possibilities, but then some of the meditations being quite wonderful, but most of them being really tough. But I kept going. And one thing I've noticed about success in any field, and in that sense, Raj Yoga is no different. It's practice, practice, practice. The difference with this is that it's not just learning a skill that will empower you for life. It's learning something that's going to empower you for eternity. It's going to empower a real deep sense of peace and contentment. And when you ask, if you really go down to the roots of the motivation, if people really look at what they're doing in life and become aware of asking the question, why do you do what you do? The motivation is that we're always looking for more peace or contentment or love or happiness. All of our motivation comes down from these things. Now, some people you might think, well, that person seems to enjoy just getting angry a lot. But if you think about why people get angry, it's a coping mechanism for not having an awareness and depth of peace in the soul. So what happens is that frustrations build up, and then when that frustration is released through anger, then there's a relief for the soul. The problem is with any negative or emotion or vice is that over time it becomes extremely destructive, because when I start to get into that pattern, it just gets worse and worse and worse. It's a bit like an addiction. And eventually I'm going to cause some serious damage to other people and myself. I'm going to break relationships, and I'm actually going to cause more sorrow. But if I have that understanding, that awareness that where do these vices, where do these negative emotions come from? Then I can start to have some compassion actually for myself and for other people. In that at least I'm starting to understand that no soul wants to be peaceless and miserable. If you ran a course, come and learn how to be peaceless and miserable, I don't think it would be very popular. I think it's probably quite a few of us could teach it, but it's not an attractive proposition. So when I look at have an awareness of why I do everything I do, I'm always trying to get more peace, contentment, love, more happiness. But I've just, because the mind is so derailed, I've developed very, very strange and ineffective ways of actually achieving that. And again, it comes down to just how damaged and off track the mind has become. So we're dealing with a world that has a lot of information, but no wisdom, or very little wisdom. And it's understanding that actually all the wisdom I need is within the soul itself. If I am connected to the power of peace within the self, and that becomes my overriding awareness, then actually, naturally, all the words I say and the actions I perform are going to be ones that increase that power of peace within myself, but also for others as well. And there is no greater gift you can give in the world. It's really also connecting with the heart, because, if I ask myself, who do I really love spending time with? It's people who are more connected to the heart, that are more loving and giving. If you're around somebody who's really sweet in their nature and they have a very positive outlook, it doesn't really matter how clever they are or how educated they are. It's just to whatever extent someone's connected to the heart, connected to love, connected to compassion, connected to the original qualities of the soul, then always those people are a joy to be around. Even if they don't, it doesn't even need to be a conversation. It's just being in the presence of people like that is just nice. Those are the type of souls that light up the world, and those that are more in touch with their original qualities. So it's also going back to really reflecting on the awareness of what's important in life, really. You know, it's not about increasing the amount of land we own or how much stuff we've got or all of that stuff. It's about the quality of the experience of relationship with myself and others. So healing soul consciousness, first of all, the first place I need to heal is this connection between the soul and the mind. So we'll look at that in the meditation. We'll practice that in the meditation we do soon. And developing that power of awareness of the self as a soul, that the soul can start to influence the mind in a very positive way. And the peace that comes from the soul starts to infuse into the mind. And then naturally, actually, the old influences on the mind start to dissolve away quite naturally. Because really the mind is looking for peace. And it's done its best to try and work out how to get it from interacting with the outside world, but failed quite badly. So when I show up as the soul, the parent, the king, the queen, and take back charge of that inner kingdom, then actually there's a lot of relief in the mind that finally the real solution, the true solution to that sorrow that's been created has come. And then once the mind starts to calm down, then the senses of the body also become more calm. And the kingdom starts to work in the right order, that the soul becomes in charge once again. And that everything else then starts to flow in a more natural way. And the wisdom in the soul will actually direct me as to what I need to do in life. So one of the key benefits of this awareness of soul consciousness is when I reconnect to the heart of the soul. You can imagine if you are in a state which is pure, there's no contamination, no influence of negativity, that a foundation where peace can exist. And then on the basis of peace, that allows me to experience real respect and love for the self. Just like peace can't really exist without a foundation of purity, love can't exist without a foundation of peace. And this is why in Raj Yoga we talk a lot about peace as being the foundational quality of the soul. Because if I don't have peace, there is disturbance. There is some frustration. And where there is frustration, I can't really have total respect and love for myself. There's always something that's disturbing that, that's interfering with it. And so it becomes conditional. And then when it's conditional for the self based on my mood or what I'm observing in my own behavior, then there is no foundation for any real happiness or contentment. So when I have peace and love and respect for myself, then I can start to feel more contented, a real deep sense of contentment that comes from inside, nothing to do with my job or role or upbringing or experience of life. This is coming from an eternal awareness, an internal awareness of the soul. And then when there is purity, peace, love, happiness, then there is enthusiasm. There is a feeling of power that a sense of wanting to contribute, a sense of wanting to serve. And that's actually, when you think about it, what life brings meaning to life. When I am empowered in myself and I can actually serve other people from that space, and I can be a positive influence in my own life, but also in the life of others, then that service to humanity, the reward from that is a real win-win, because the person who's serving feels really, really good being able to share those good things. And the person or people receiving it also feel that as well. And it inspires change in others. So these qualities, sometimes we don't think about how they're linked. We talk about our peace and love, but actually, when I start to create space for meditation and the awareness, developing the awareness of soul consciousness, the wisdom becomes awakened within the soul. And as I say, it's completely a different paradigm. Like, life is extremely complicated for most of us these days. And trying to discern what decisions to make is extremely difficult because there's so much information. And I can study information and then come to a decision, and that's fine, and I may progress for a while. But again, if that's just based on worldly stuff and there isn't that foundation of peace, then eventually it's going to break again. Now, the wisdom of the soul is very much focused on not success in terms of achieving stuff, but real success is of feeling peaceful. That is the ultimate success, because if you think about it, if I feel peaceful, then even if challenging things happen, if I feel peaceful, I feel peaceful. And if that power of peace is stable and I've worked on it, then I can more easily face and overcome challenges that happen. And because that peace is there, I will more easily be able to see what the best way forward is. Whereas if there's a lot of chaos in the mind and confusion, then it's very difficult to see how to make progress and what decisions I should take to move forward. So soul consciousness is really an awareness that, as I said, is a completely different paradigm. It works on a completely different level. I think Daddy Janki once described it as success in terms of that consciousness is a bit like there's miracles on one side and challenges on the other side. And that is that the challenges aren't going to go away straight away. But the miracle of the awareness of soul consciousness is so empowering that those challenges become much more easy to face. And I also start to understand that everything in life happens for a reason. And there's something to learn. Whereas if I'm in the old paradigm, it can just seem like things happen randomly and it's a question of good and bad luck. And why is this happening to me? Why is this person treating me like this? And it just goes on and on. There's never stop. These questions never stop. There's a feeling of injustice, frustration, all sorts of things. In soul consciousness, that just isn't there. And yeah, there's going to be a period where obviously it's a journey, but the soul is so powerful that it's amazing that if you think about it, certainly in Raj Yoga, when students are studying, say, look, even if you set aside 20 minutes a day to start with, you can turn your life around with that. And especially first thing in the morning, before the phone comes on, or, the method is very important because, when you're asleep, what happens to the soul? It's that the soul can't actually remain awake in the physical world 24 hours a day because it would just collapse. It's very hard work to be in this world. at the moment for the soul. We need sleep. And we know from scientific studies that if you don't get enough sleep over a long period, it's extremely detrimental on the health. In fact, getting enough sleep is one of the main things to improve health. Many studies have shown this now. And in Raj Yoga, we know it's because the soul actually, the consciousness of the soul detaches from the body in sleep. So it becomes more subtle and it can sort of regenerate energy. That's why we sleep. Because the soul's natural state is to be, the soul is not a physical entity. So when I wake up, there is a time where I'm sort of in between. But as soon as you switch your phone on or open your emails or get up and start doing stuff, then the old habits of the mind will start to kick in. And then you can still meditate, but it's not as effective. So first thing when you wake up, whenever that is, it's really important to learn how to meditate. There's lots of courses here for that. Raj Yoga Core meditation course. Learn how to connect with the self as a soul. And last thing at night, for the same reason that just before the soul does its stuff and disconnects, is what state am I in? Have I just watched a horror film before I go to bed? Or the news? Same thing. Then be aware of the influences on my awareness. You know, it's not brain surgery. It's quite obvious when you think about it. If the influence on the mind is very negative last thing at night, I need to do a meditation to just let the day go, whatever's happened, just step back and think, okay, just be aware of what's happened in the day, aware of what stress I've accumulated in the body and the mind, and just let it go. And there are lots of meditations on letting go, and there's lots of resources available for this. And then if I also have the habit of taking a minute 5 or 6 times a day when I'm on the go, you know, when I'm waiting for the computer to boot up, kettle to boil, or I'm stuck in a queue, lots of times where before I would have felt frustrated, I can actually use that time to just take a step back in my mind and reconnect to being a soul and really empower myself throughout the day. And if I'm doing this, now the thing is, 20 minutes a day out of 24 hours, if I don't want to do that, or if I'm not prepared to do that, where is my awareness on my well-being? That's a question I ask myself if I start to feel lazy about my meditation routine. Because I know full well if I don't do the practice, and there are days when for few these days, but when I don't want to do it, but I know the benefits of it. And I know the downsides of not doing it. You know, because when you start to experience more soul consciousness in life, the benefits are so big that, and if I'm not prepared to take 20 minutes at least out of 24 hours, then I need to maybe have a conversation with myself, you know, about what do I really want to feel like? Do I want to carry on this in the same way? Why don't I love myself enough? Why don't I have enough respect and regard for myself to take 20 minutes out for my own well-being? You know, this is a question that I will ask myself. It's a good one to ask. Because actually, you know, if you find that, then you probably end up wanting to spend an hour and a half a day meditating. So it might require a bit of discipline at first. But when you start to experience the benefits, then you actually want to do it. So just some thoughts on awareness and the power of soul consciousness. And I think we're running out of time. So do you normally have questions or just a closing questions? Okay, so we'll finish with a meditation, but if anybody, sorry, online, I don't think we can't take questions from the online. Oh, we can, okay. But I don't know if anybody has any questions here. Yeah. Hmm? Yeah, sure. Sure. Well, I think actually having a longer period of meditation would be good. So there's a lot of words. And I think words serve a role in terms of inspiring and challenging, but at the end of the day, what's going to change my experience is the practice of meditation. So just sitting comfortably. And I'd like to do a meditation. I do this quite a lot actually in programs, but it's because I use it myself. And we're talking earlier about soul consciousness. Part of the experience is being able to create a sense of self that is beyond the mind. So this is a meditation that helps to do that. So you can either close your eyes, or we typically practice an open eye meditation in Raj Yoga, but whatever's most comfortable for you. So you can focus on this picture of the soul. A part of the experience of moving towards soul consciousness is also creating space. And that means deliberately slowing everything down. Moving into a space, into an energy that is more silent and quiet, where I can start to see the wood for the trees. The mind is running at a phenomenal speed. The soul works on a very different frequency of energy. I practice taking my attention inwards, and I use the knowledge of the self as a soul as a point of focus for concentration. So I move my concentration to a single point of focus, the soul, the conscious being behind the eyes, in the center of the forehead. I imagine myself as this tiny star, this conscious being, very powerful, pure being, very tiny, very concentrated, very powerful, sat in this huge costume, the body. And to practice the awareness that I am the soul, not the body. Taking another step within the soul, is also the entity that I know, that I call the mind, that creates all my thoughts and feelings. I need to step back even beyond the awareness of the mind. So I imagine that I am in a cinema. This is not a normal cinema. This is the cinema of my mind. And I see there's just one seat in this cinema. It's a huge cinema, just one seat in the middle, which is my seat for the soul. And there's a huge screen at the front, the screen of the mind. So I, the soul, take my position on the seat, looking towards the screen. I may be aware that there is a lot happening on the screen. I might not be able to see anything specific, but there is the awareness that there is a lot of chaos, a lot of noise, a lot of influences, memories, stories. It is like there is 100 or 1,000 movies playing at the same time. And I realize that for most of my life, I am actually lost in the screen, being thrown around by all these influences and stories, not quite knowing where to base myself, where my foundation is. A lot of confusion, a lot of information. So instead of that, this time, I keep my awareness as the soul looking at the screen of the mind. That I, the peaceful being, am separate from the mind. Rather than getting too involved in what's going on the screen, I look at myself, the soul, and notice that I am a conscious light. And the power of that light is one of peace. And I focus on the quality of that light, quality of calmness, of stillness, deep sense of serenity. And I see that light shining outwards from either soul. And as I focus on that light, I see that it starts to touch the screen of the mind. It reaches out from the core of my being and touches the screen. And as it does so, it gently starts to dissolve all the old influences, all the stories, all the activity that was there on the screen. And that light starts to grow until it is covering the whole screen, this light of peace. The mind becomes a reflection of the soul. That light spreads throughout the mind until there is light all around the soul, saturating the mind and spreading out into the body, so that the body also starts to become relaxed and peaceful. The head, the neck, spreading down through the arms to the tips of the fingers. And as this light moves, it releases any tension that was in the body, through the chest, torso, through the legs, through the calves, the feet, to the tips of the toes, and then downwards through the bottoms of the feet to the center of the earth, which absorbs, grounds the energy, the physical energy of the body. The body becomes peaceful, the mind becomes peaceful from the influence of the self, the soul. As I bring my attention gently back, I bring this sense, this awareness of the self as a peaceful soul back with me into my evening. And I make a promise to myself to practice developing this awareness every day as an act of love for the self, as an act of respect for the self. Om Shanti. I am a soul, a being of peace.
Thank you, Matthew, for the wonderful talk and all the tools and tips given. Our next week talk, same time, same place, and the topic is loving detachment. Also, we do have some meditations, which is every Mondays and Thursdays evening, guided meditation, 7 to 7:30. So everybody is welcome. And we do have Sunday morning meditation, which is online. And to join that, you have to register online, and you get a Zoom link, which is every Sunday morning. And product of the week is Awaken Your Inner Wisdom. Don't forget to... It's aligned with today's talk, so it's available in the shop. You can browse through on your way out. So once again, thank you for joining us, and have a safe journey back home. Thank you.